now call to order the Supplemental Retirement Plan Board of Trustees meeting, February 26th, 2026. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for being here virtually and in person. Let's begin with the Pledge of Allegiance and the salute to the North Carolina flag.
With allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Salute the flag of North Carolina and pledge to the Old North State, love, loyalty, and faith.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Handful of administrative things. If anyone wishes to make a public comment, sign up or email Patty Hall at patty.hall@nctreasurer.com. That's PATTI.HALL@nctreasurer.com. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and will be posted online with the other board materials. We ask that you please mute your phone or computer if not speaking. We'll be taking roll call by name and for all votes. Unless there is an objection, a motion and a second will be counted as yes votes. Board members, if you must leave the meeting at any point, please announce your departure. If you return, please announce your return as well. These items must be recorded in the meeting minutes. Likewise, please state your name before speaking. Finally, texts or other recorded communications between board members during the meeting, even on personal phones or public records to the extent that they concern the meeting. Secretary, please call the roll.
Treasurer Briner.
Here.
Charlie Perouse. Charlie Perouse. Lorraine Johnson.
Here.
Lanier McRee.
Present.
James Richardson.
Here.
Bob Shea.
Here.
Raj Singh. Raj Singh. Steve Bean.
Here.
And Robert Hillman.
Here.
We have a quorum. Okay, please take a moment to review the agenda. Does anyone present have an actual, potential, or the appearance of conflict of interest in any of these matters? Okay. Hearing none. Before we get into the consent agenda, maybe let's begin with the balloons or elephant in the room, so to speak, in the back. Today marks an important day in supplemental retirement plans history, exceeding 20 billion of assets for the first time. It's obviously a testament to the hardworking men and women in North Carolina and their commitment to being retirement ready and their savings to do so. But it's also a compliment to the team and mostly your leadership, Jeff. So thank you for everything you've done to get us here. But moreover, you'll see that the continuous improvement that we expect from this plan is evident in the agenda today too. And so it's not enough to get to 20 billion. We have aspirations to go further. And the way we do that is by making it a better and better plan. And so those are the agenda items today, as I suspect they always will be. So thank you and thank the team for everything you've done to get us here today. We have some things to eat in the back. No guarantee that it won't induce a sugar coma. But it might be worth it anyway to celebrate. So with that, let's move to the consent agenda. So on the consent agenda today are the minutes from December 4th, 2025 Board of Trustees meeting and the updates to the governance policies. Those are in your packet. Are there any requests from the board to move an item from the consent agenda to the regular discussion items? Okay, hearing no requests, the consent agenda items for the board are adopted as presented. Let's move over to another piece of good news, and that is administrative matters to Jeff Hancock.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Treasurer. As a little bit of background, as you know, we in the past have charged a fee in order to pay for the services that the staff renders to the plans. We've been fortunate through our circumstances to have a nice amount of fee reserves, and so over the past couple of years we have voted on a fee holiday, and that's what we're putting in front of the board today again, is to extend that fee holiday for another 12-month period. In addition to the fee holiday, we're trying to further reduce our fee reserves. And so we're also proposing that the plans pick up 1/4's worth of record-keeping fees for all participants. That will equate to about $2.25 million. And again, that the aim of that is to help us to further reduce some of those fee reserves that we've amassed. So we would look for the board to vote and approve staff's recommendation to extend the fee holiday for another 12-month period, as well as picking up 1/4's worth of record-keeping fees on behalf of plan participants.
So moved. Is there a second?
I'll second, Steve.
Is there any discussion on these topics? Pretty uncontroversial, I suppose. Let's call the roll, please.
All right, Treasurer Briner,
Aye.
Charlie Peruse,
Aye.
Lorraine Johnson,
Aye.
Lanier McRee, Lanier, James Richardson,
Aye.
Raj Singh, and Robert Hillman. Robert Hillman.
All right, the motion passes. Members will enjoy the benefit of that for another year. Let's move over to legal matters. Over to you, Reed.
Historically, the NC 401k plan has required employers to treat their employees uniformly when it comes to making employer contributions, whether that's percentage match or percentage across the board. But in an effort to be more responsive to employers, staff, and the board over the last couple of years, has relaxed that uniformity requirement a little bit while still providing some sort of reasonable safeguards on treating employees the same. For example, a couple of years ago, staff recommended the board approve tiered matching contributions. And then at the last board meeting, we allowed employers in the 401k plan to make special contributions to employers who are on employment contracts that have been approved by a city council or board of county commissioners or other governing board. So before the board today are three additional areas where staff thinks we can provide a little more flexibility, once again, being responsive to, trying to be responsive to employers' needs. One is allowing special contributions to part-time law enforcement officers, as well as other law enforcement officers, regardless of whether they're entitled to statutory 5% contribution. Another is an option to provide special contributions to firefighters and rescue squad workers. And then the third one is to allow some reasonable grouping of employees according to job classification, skills, or duties, with some restrictions on that. Having at least 20% of your employees in a group, no more than 3 groups, and treating everyone the same within each group. The second item is actually required by Treasury regulations for last year, and that's Roth catch-up contributions. Secure 2.0 required catch-up contributions to be on a Roth basis for certain highly compensated employees, and let's get the Treasury regulations were finalized last year. We need to adopt plan document amendments to incorporate Roth contributions. And just as I put in the memo, it's $150,000 in the previous year based on FICA compensation. So for example, if someone earned $150,000 or more FICA compensation last year, their catch-up contributions, if any, need to be drawn this year. And that $150,000 would be adjusted for a cost of living. Are there any questions about either of those sets of plan documents? Staff recommends the adoption of the amendments in your board materials and to direct staff to amend the plans to incorporate catch-up.
Do you have a motion to approve the plan document amendments?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Please call the roll.
All right, Treasurer Briner,
Aye.
Charlie Cruz,
Aye.
Lanier McRee,
Aye.
James Richardson,
Aye.
Raj Singh, Steve Bain,
Aye.
and Robert Hillman.
Aye. Just also for the record, I was having some issues with the last vote. I don't know if it's too late, but I was an aye vote. I just couldn't find the button in time.
Great, thank you, Mr. Hillman.
Okay, the motion passes. Thank you. Let's go to partners at UHY for presentation on the upcoming annual audit of the plans.
Tom?
Yeah, Jeff, can you hear me?
Yep.
Awesome. Okay, pleasure to be here virtually. I had a mishap 2 days ago, couldn't walk, couldn't even stand the thought of walking through airports yesterday. So I will be doing this for the first time virtually, and unfortunately you guys have cake apparently on the day that I'm not there. All right, so Patty, if you can get me to the next slide. So today's agenda, I don't think there's a vote. There's really no, I'm not presenting anything, and this is really, but from my perspective, so again, Thomas Ray, partner, UHY, we audit the financial statements of the plan. So I'm just going to kind of go through the scope of the engagement, go through some required communications regarding our responsibilities, briefly kind of go through the methodology. There's a few slides which are just trustee fiduciary duties and responsibilities. Those slides are really just a reminder as to really what the main focus of my message today is really addressing the board before we start the financial statement audit in terms from a risk perspective to make sure there's anything, Mr. Treasurer or any of the subcommittee members, anything that keeps you up at night. In terms from a risk, we can either talk about how those risks are being addressed in the audit currently, or if they're not adequately, then obviously this would be the time to kind of discuss and build those into the audit and make sure that those risks are being addressed. Ideally, our risk assessment process is already covering that. So, but again, this is a good exercise to get the viewpoints of the treasurer and the subcommittee. So again, that'll be really the last part of the discussion, and from my point of view for this one, probably the most important. And then obviously I'll be back later in the year to present the results of the audit. So next slide. So just real quickly, from a methodology, doesn't matter which firm you're working with, every financial statement audit is risk-based. So we take a risk-based approach. I know this is kind of phased in four categories. I typically view it in two. So we're in that phase one and phase two, what we call preliminary field work, where we're kind of doing our risk assessment, walkthroughs, test of controls, etc. And then after the year end, obviously we then we roll into what phases 3 and 4, which I call our final field work or substantive field work, where we actually perform testing and analysis on the balances in the general ledger and the financial statements and footnotes, and then obviously issue an opinion on those final financial statements. Next slide. So back to that methodology, as I said, on the internal controls. So that's kind of where we are. We're in the infancy of that for this year's audit. The whole idea of that is just obtaining an understanding of all those key processes around financial reporting. In addition to kind of the walkthroughs we do on site and with staff, we're, as you might guess, some of your key outside vendors, BNY and Power, they subject themselves to internal control audits annually. Those are reported out in SOC 1 reports. And so we obtain those for both BNY and Empower and review those for key areas that they're focused on, particularly as it relates to the financial statements, and then just make sure there's no issues there. Then obviously that kind of is the main driver into our risk-based audit approach. Then we perform tests of design of those key processes, and then perform tests of effectiveness over some of those areas that you would expect contributions to all the inflows coming from the employers, the outflows, distributions, and then obviously all that underlying participant data, PII. One thing that I typically fail to remind the subcommittee when I do this presentation in the past is that in addition to the contract itself dictates that we perform a financial statement audit, which is typically the primary engagement for most of my state defined contribution plans. Just a reminder and a kudos to the treasurer and the subcommittee. We, in addition, also perform employer audits every year for this plan. So that's part of the contract. It's kind of outside of the scope of a normal financial statement audit, but it's a very good exercise in the sense that we identify obviously all the employers that are remitting contributions throughout the year, and then on an annual basis we kind of sample. So we always have, I think, the 10 largest employers, which probably is about 80%, 75, 80% of the total dollars. And then randomly we pick just 10 other employers on a random basis to kind of keep people on their toes. And we're doing that. We're working directly with all those employers, validating those accurate remittances to Empower, the timeliness of those remittances, the IRS limitation compliance, and then just making sure that all that participant data, dates of birth, hire dates, etc., vacation, all that other information that's reported to Empower is being done completely and accurately, and then kind of as a separate report in addition to our financial statements at year end, we provide that to the subcommittee and the treasurer and as to the results of those tests. Next slide. So I mentioned those phases 3 and 4. That's what I would call the substantive testing or year-end testing, where we're focused on the actual general ledger, trial balance numbers, and then all those which drive and roll up into the financial statements. So from the investment perspective, obviously we're confirming with Empower, BNY, and the various investment managers for pretty much 100% of the portfolio. And once we're doing, in addition to doing that, we're doing price testing or what we call validation testing, analytical procedures over both the unrealized gains in the portfolio, plus any interest income or realized gains in fixed income assets, and then performing analytical procedures over the investment expenses. I mentioned testing on the contributions from a substantive perspective. We're confirming contributions with a significant portion of the employers in addition to that separate employer testing. Doing analytical procedures and reconciling all those contributions up into the trial balance. Similarly, on those outflows or benefit payments, distributions to participants, analytical procedures, and then reconciling all of that distribution detail into the trial balance. And then obviously focused less or so, but still just as importantly on any administrative expenses to the plan and making sure that they're all in alignment with the plan document and reasonable from an analytical perspective. Next slide. This one's real quick. I mean, again, this is a requirement back to those required communications to those charged with governance. Just really just pointing out that the significant audit risk, when you take a step back and, and congratulations again on 20 billion, that's what we're doing. We're auditing the completeness and accuracy and existence of that 20 billion. So just a reminder that that's where we're spending a lot of our time, is in that investment portfolio and the ins and outs around that portfolio throughout the year. Next couple slides are really just, again, just a reminder for the trustees. It's the sole trustee plan, just the kind of the duty of loyalty, care, and prudence. And then just kind of what goes, the other slides, 2 slides after that are really just kind of those underlying drivers. Always a good reminder from an auditor. We work for the treasurer, and obviously on behalf of the plan participants and the subcommittee. While we throughout the year we're working with plan staff, we never try to lose sight that we're working for the trustees and the plan participants, and that kind of independence is at the core of what we do. So again, that's why this next slide on the discussion of risk is really what I'm here for. So is there any questions from the treasurer or the subcommittee members in terms of the process in and around the audit, or just any other risks that we want to discuss today? And then that's really what I'm here to kind of just announce the kickoff of the audit and kind of just glean from make sure everyone kind of understands the process and that we're addressing any and all risks, particularly significant audit risks that would impact financial statements.
Thank you, Tom. I have no questions. Any other board members? No, sir. Thank you for your work on here. We appreciate it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And again, I'm sorry I wasn't there in person, and but next time.
Rob, I did have a question. The third bullet point, the definition of the word active role and oversight of the entities. What does that mean?
That's a little bit subjective, sir, in the sense that your active role is just the participation in like these meetings, making sure that you are addressing any concerns, and operationally there's a lot of risks, as you might guess, around a plan. Any large defined $20 billion defined contribution plan, a lot of those risks are being addressed, as I said. So you might have risk in and around the operations of Empower, and as I said, we're testing Empower systems. They're doing it. So you're just kind of your oversight, your understanding of the plan and those risks would be kind of in line with an active role. Hiring a CPA, hiring a firm, correct, is part of that role and your fiduciary responsibilities in terms of saying, hey, are we, not only is Empower and BNY reporting out to us, at every meeting and quarterly, but we're having a financial statement audit by an independent accounting firm to kind of validate all of those processes and controls.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, thanks again, Tom.
Okay, thank you.
Let's move on to a discussion about benchmarking with Franco Wang from CEM, who will present the retirement plan's benchmarking report.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, I don't have sharing, but I do see the PDF is up. So yeah, if we could just full screen this, we'll step through. I'm happy to take questions as we go along. I'll start with a very brief introduction. My name is Franco Wong. I'm a relationship manager for CEM. It's my job today to provide a unbiased third-party review of the costs, plan structure, and performance of the North Carolina supplemental retirement plans. And so moving into the first page, we provide a bit of an overview, just a reminder for folks who aren't like me, living and breathing CEM, of who we are. So we're a data and insights firm that provides actionable insights for institutional investors. We're here to help meaningfully improve the lives of pensioners globally. And we do the work through 3 core pillars of work at CEM. The top one is data and insights, where we provide benchmarking of cost and performance. That's what we're going to unpack over the next 15 or 20 minutes. The database itself that allows us to do this work, we run an annual survey that collects the holdings, costs, returns, options for over 300 plans globally. But that forms a database that we can do research findings as well. So not just answering questions like, hey, how are you doing versus your peer group? How do you look from a cost effectiveness perspective? But what are some long-term trends that we can see in the market? And finally, we offer regional communities where institutional investors, member service providers group up and, using the research as a fact base and as a backdrop, discuss and share best practices and improve the industry overall as a group. So it's over 34 years of history. There's over 500 institutional investors that are covered in the database. It's over 14 trillion US dollars in AUM. And on the pension administration side, we cover over 50 million members and pensioners. Go to the next slide. Before we go into the results themselves, we offer a brief look at the universe of funds that allows us to do the work. I'll just note that when we go through and look at things like performance, like your net returns or your value added or your risk, we're comparing you to the entire US CEM DC database. And so it's 121 funds, represents over 2.5 trillion in assets, 18 million participants. And the rationale there is that you are broadly selecting from a similar opportunity set of investments. And so from a performance perspective, we compare you to the broadest comparator set possible. The same isn't true on cost. So on the next slide, we compare you to a custom peer group of DC plans that are banded around you in size, because size is a major factor that impacts costs. So you can all select from similar money managers and select similar options to offer in your lineup, similar investment sets, but you can't access them at the same cost. And so when we do the cost benchmarking, and you see that later in the results, that's versus this peer group specifically. On the next slide, we show a little bit more of the characteristics of you versus this peer group. And I'll highlight a couple of details on this slide. I'll note that one, when you're looking across the three columns, your plan, the peers, and the universe, that from a plan assets perspective, your plan is $18 billion. That is closer to the peer group at about 13 than it is to the US universe. The other item that I'll note is that you are more, well, I should say your participants have chosen to be more actively managed than both the peer group and the US universe. And that's going to have an implication for cost when we look at that in just a little bit. So what I'm referring to is that third row from the bottom there, average percent of assets indexed. You're at 46% versus the peer group at 66%. So flip the other way, your plan is 54% active, while the peer group is only 34% active.
And Frank, I'm not sure this is a question for you or for the team, but the percentage of active assets, that's largely because of our decisions inside Goalmaker.
Correct.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, no, all good, all good. If we flip to the next slide, we show a little bit of your structure and your plan design as it compares to the peers in the US. I'll make just a couple of comments here. On the top right, we show you the type and the number of investment options. You'll note that you're at 11 versus the peer average of 12.9. Two items to note there. One is that you do have an inflation protect like US tips option. It's excluded because basically we don't want to double count your assets. So because all of the allocation is inside your Goalmaker allocation, it doesn't show up when we look at this, total number when we're comparing them. That's one item. The other item I'll note is that when we look at the universe broadly over a 10, 15-year period, we have observed a trend towards simplification. So most apparent a decade ago was a simplification of US equity options. You always saw a lot of US core, US value, US growth. And you'd have participants who would invest in all three because hey, I don't know which one is best, and effectively just have a core option. And so we've seen trends, not just with North Carolina, but with other peers in the CM universe, where they say like, hey, we actually just want to simplify and say, we'll choose the manager, but really the decision for the participant is here's an active U.S. equity option and here's a passive U.S. equity option. Maybe some preserve this, some have removed this as well, of maintaining an allocation across capitalizations as well. And so just a general trend we've noted in the universe. The other comment I was going to make on this slide is that your default option is your goal maker, is a target date option. That's by and large what the peer group and the universe does as well. And generally it's viewed as the gold standard of hey, here's a set it and forget it option for you to figure when you want to retire and put it in and have it automatically rebalance, and not run into the issues that participants ran into 10-15 years ago, where the default option was a money market fund, and they check in on 20-30 years down the line and say, hey, I'm not actually ready to retire. Go to the next slide. Here is the first view of costs that we show. And so I'll be pretty brief on this. Your total cost, 26 basis points of total plan assets, about $121 per participant. This is a raw comparison of costs, so it doesn't adjust for the fact that you've negotiated fees. It doesn't adjust for the fact that your participants have made decisions that are different than the decisions that participants have made in other plans. And so a fair comparison or answer to the question, are your costs reasonable? Are you cost effective? Is our benchmark cost, which we show in a couple of slides, that does make these adjustments for the decisions that your participants have made, effectively the asset mix decisions. Go to the next slide. So we saw your point in time cost on the previous slide. This slide shows how your costs have trended over time. And I'll note two general observations on this page. One is that costs for you have been fairly flat over the 5-year period. You were at 25.6 basis points in 2020. That's slightly increased to 26 basis points. But if you look at the interim years, it actually jumps up and down around 26 basis points. And if we extend the history, that's actually pretty consistent as well. For you, that's actually two offsetting impacts. So your administrative expenses have been decreasing steadily over this 5-year period. However, your participants have allocated more into Goalmaker, into your target date fund. And overall, your target date fund costs more than the average passive option. That's in contrast to the universe. It shows up here again, is that there's a general trend in the peer group and the universe that they're moving more towards passive asset management. And so on that bottom right chart, we see the peer group start at 61% passive in 2020 and moves to 65% in 2024. And you see a similar trend for the broad universe. And that drives a cost reduction for the rest of the peers. If we go to the next slide. So here we share what the results of that benchmark cost is. And really mechanically, what it is on the DC side is effectively, if you were to take your participants, your physical asset mix, and give it to the peer group and say, hey, if we were to pay the fees that you paid, if our participants were to make the implementation style decisions that your participants made, what would that resulting build up cost be? And the results are that the peer group would effectively have it for $39.2 million or 23.3 basis points versus your 26 basis points. But it's the results of two offsetting factors. And I'd say the factors that are within management's control are ones where you show up favorably versus the peer group, and your participants have made decisions that increase the cost versus the similar versus the same versus the peer group. And so specifically, if you look at that table on the bottom right, in terms of what you pay for similar options, you're saving $1.4 million or 0.8 basis points. And that's saying like, hey, if we were to look at your US equity fund, your active US equity fund, what do you pay for that versus what does the peer group pay? If we were to look at your 2040 target date fund, what do you pay for that? What does the peer group pay for their 2040 fund? So across all of those comparisons, you are running lean versus the peer group and you're doing well. Similarly, for administrative services, you're paying about $1.8 million less or 1.1 basis points less than the peer group. And where all of that and then some gets given back versus the benchmark cost is the fact that your participants have chosen to invest more in active management, one, and two, I think the question earlier alluded to it, that within the goal maker, within your target date fund, which is the default option, you are generally more active than the peer group and the universe. And so all of that gives back about 7.7 million, about 4.6 basis points. Now, one thing that didn't come up earlier that's worth mentioning is that your plan is a supplemental DC plan. For some of the peers, actually, I think most of the peers, it is more so their primary retirement vehicle. And so we haven't looked at this specifically in the past few years, but anecdotally, we've talked to peers that have a similar structure where almost every participant or almost every participant is an active member of a primary savings based plan like a DB plan, and then they have access to an optional DC supplemental plan. Generally, what we've observed is that the decisions that those members make, the behavior is different. And the fact of the matter is, you can view that original DB plan as kind of that fixed benefit that is insulated from market risk. And what we've heard anecdotally is that members will then say like, oh, okay, well then with my DC plan, I can choose to, swing for the fences of the wrong term, but I can choose to invest more in active management or put more in equities and say, hey, like I'm okay. I'm a bit more comfortable with risk in my DC plan, given that it is a supplement retirement vehicle. So just a bit of qualitative context behind the numbers that we're seeing on this page.
Quantitatively, you'd see that. Presumably, if that were the case, you'd see materially different allocations to Goalmaker or LifePath or whatever strategies across our plan than other primary plans. What's the magnitude of that difference?
So we haven't done deep research that I'm able to speak on it concretely with that kind of background. I've worked with one other plan that I covered that similarly had a supplemental option. They went to the extreme. They simplified their lineup to 6 fully passive options. And we didn't interrogate them on this, but they did note that like, hey, generally people are investing in the equity options and just the higher risk, higher variance options, as opposed to they offered a target date fund and they offered a fixed income option there as well.
Thanks.
Certainly. So the next couple of slides are actually a distillation of an entire section later in the report, but they show how each individual option stacks up versus the peer group. I alluded to this earlier, the cost are versus a benchmark cost, which for most cases is your peer group. For your goal maker funds, it's versus a custom built benchmark cost. I'll expand on that in just a second. For the performance metrics, those are all compared versus the universe, the relevant universe, single year or 5 year. Just an overview of how we're doing the cost benchmarking for the goal maker funds. Even under the hood, we acknowledge that a 2040 fund is not the same as every other 2040 fund. Clearly, we see that just with your goal maker setup, because you have multiple options. You have the conservative option, you have the moderate option, you have an aggressive option. And so when we do the cost benchmarking for target date funds, we do a bottom up build of what is actually in the asset class. And so it adjusts for the fact that, somebody's target date fund for their 2040 retirement option might have more or less equity than somebody else's. And so effectively you get a custom bottom up built benchmark cost that is adjusted for your asset mix within each of these options. That's one item I wanted to mention on this. If we flip to the next slide, the other the other observation that I'll make is that, um, like CEM doesn't give advice or recommendations, but personally, having looked at this for over 10 years, I've made the observation that not every fund offers effectively decumulation options. And the fact that you have pre-retirement and post-retirement, that you're maintaining your 2020 fund, your 2015 fund, and so on. Um, Personally, I think is a good thing because it acknowledges the fact that a pensioners or retirees' risk tolerance when they are 65 is different than when they are 75, is different than when they are 85. And so that's just a comment that it's something that I've seen that I don't see in every single plan that we see. We go to the next slide. The next couple speak to a performance perspective. So we look at your average total net return. Here, your results are more muted versus the peer group. Part of the driver we'll see in a couple of slides is that you do have more in your target date funds. That's your default option. You've had it there for a long time. People do that, or people allocate to it. And it has had more muted returns relative to plans that might have had more just in straight U.S. equity. And so, yeah, over the 5-year period, average net total return was 7.4%, compares to a U.S. median of 8.2%.
Just to clarify, this is through 2024, correct?
Yes, these are the results ending December 2024.
Thank you.
Certainly. If we go to the next slide. Here we show a little bit of that attribution. The two comments that I'll make, one is on the top right chart. We'll note that target date and balanced, not just for you, but for everyone, offers a more middle of the road, a more balanced return as compared to U.S. equity, which has had a very strong 5-year period. But above that of target date and balanced, or is above that of non-U.S. and global equity and other, other holdings like real assets, REITs, stable value GICs, and bonds. And so combine that with the bottom right chart where we see your target date and balance allocation of 48% compares higher than the peer average of 35 and the US average of 33%. This shows a little bit of that attribution of reasons why your total fund return was lower than the peer group. The other item that I can that I'll offer up on this slide is that generally your participants are investing less in less inflation sensitive assets. So when you look at stable value and GIC, cash, money market, and bonds in total, those bottom 3 rows, you have about 16% in there. For the peer group, that's at 22%. For the universe, it's around 18%. And so there is a little bit there where you can see, more of your participants are investing in that target date balanced fund, less so in these long-term, less inflation-sensitive assets. And so I'll summarize just to say that there's a few very good practices that we see in terms of plan structure and plan design. The target date fund as the option, simplification in the lineup. There's evidence of strong cost management in that it's flat, and the factors that are more within your control are areas where you compare favorably versus the peer group. From a return perspective, it is more muted versus the peer group, and those two are kind of two sides of the same coin because really it's you've done a very good job in funneling assets into target date and balanced into your goal maker funds. pause for any questions, comments.
Anything? Okay. Oh, this is very helpful. Thank you.
Excellent. No, you're very welcome. Thank you for the partnership. Thank you for the business. It's always good to help. Yeah, and let us know if anything comes up in the interim. We're always happy to chat.
Thank you. Let's move on to our partners at Empower. Please come up.
All right, good morning, everyone. We'll review our end of the year 2025 report today. Patty, we'll start on page 4. All right, so as we've mentioned a couple times today, the significant milestone of crossing the $20 billion threshold, driven primarily through market gains. So even as distributions continue to outpace contributions, strong market participation definitely helped with the overall rise in the assets. Very good indicators too in terms of the active participation rate, average deferral rate. The average deferral rate now being just under $308 per month, and the active participation rate over 35%. And then as we've also heard on the prior presentation, GoalMaker usage remains strong with 76% of total members currently using GoalMaker. And also that's about 52% of total plan assets are in the GoalMaker service. On slide 5, we have some of the historical trends in a nice graph format there. Continued steady rise in the average participant balance, where we're now comfortably north of $60,000. Again, I mentioned the active participation rate and the average deferral rate. If you look at slide 6, unique participants with a balance continues to grow as well. And again, very strong numbers in terms of total enrollments. We just missed by a little fraction our all-time best year ever, but still a tremendous year in terms of new enrollments into the plan. And then the number of new loans remains steady as well. On slide 7, hitting all of our plan goals. I think the big call out to me on slide 7 is it was a really strong year in terms of employer actions. So 11 new employers adopted the 401k plan, 24 new employers adopted the 457 plan. Almost 50 employers added, changed, or enhanced their employer contribution program. So just continue to make great strides there. All of those employer interactions are really then the growth behind when you see like the average monthly deferral rate increase or the active participation rate increase. Those are really nice base hits that we get that like pay long-term dividends for the program. And one of the unique things that we're seeing right now from a employer perspective is that historically, when you would get a new plan to adopt, it was like a startup plan. Well, recently we've seen a trend hit where a lot of employers that have existing balances with other record keepers are not only adopting, but they're bringing over those balances as well. So that's a very nice lift to the plan as well. And when we come back to the next meeting, it will be officially over. We're going to do one of our largest ones ever here in what, Jody, a week? Right now. Yeah. City of Wilmington, that's going to add $76 million to the plan and about 750 new participants into the plan when that goes into effect here. Slide 8 looks at both of the plans in total and just compares the where things compared at the end of 2025 to the end of 24 and the end of 23. And you can really see that there in terms of total plan assets, the strong market performance, and then also just the continuing trend around asset allocation. It still is eye-opening to me that, I'm definitely aging myself. I've been coming down here now for almost 13 years. stable value as a percentage of total assets is now, asset allocation is so significant. That's now less than 11% of total assets and stable. Like when I first came down here, that was north of 25%. Yeah. So just like that stats like that just continue to amaze me with the diversification and the ongoing usage of the Goalmaker service. I'm not going to be too lengthy today because I know there's a lot of other topics we want to get to. Really quickly, we'll go to slides 36 and 37 to wrap up on. 36 gives a really good snapshot in terms of the distribution phase of things, in terms of looking at folks that are terminated and eligible to take their money out or roll their assets out. For the period, the fourth quarter, north of 95% of assets that were eligible to either leave the plan or roll out of the plans remained in the plan. And for the year, we were just shy of about 80%. That trend line has remained pretty consistent since we built out this view a few years ago. And you can see that, these plans are so large, you appreciate the work that goes into keeping the assets in the plan, but you can still see that the amount that does still leave is pretty significant. And quarter over quarter, it's typically the same folks that are ranked in the top 1, 2, or 3. And then on page 37, call center statistics for the year. Again, really good net metrics in terms of our call center goals. For all of our performance goals that we have every year, we send a report to Jeff and his team on that. And I think that going back to 2016, this is the first year where we did not pay out on one of our performance guarantees. So we were very, very happy about that. And I know our leadership that looks at that and holds us accountable was very happy about that too.
We're happy about it too.
Thank you, Treasurer. My comments are pretty brief today. I want to make sure I save time for Jody. So unless there's questions for me, I'll pass it over to Jody.
So I'll pick up on page 38 with information about the participant engagement results for 2025, fourth quarter in 2025. The field team met with over 20,000 employees and participants in the fourth quarter. More importantly, I think, is the total number of folks that we met with for all of 2025 at 90,000 employees, participants, retirees, about their plan accounts, which is up 7% over where we were with 2024. In 2025, excuse me, the team had almost 2,000 group and individual meetings on average every month, 7,500 total engagements on a monthly basis, with 54% of those occurring virtually. We also had over 300 employer meetings every month. And then on page 39, you'll see that what the engagement has led to. Mike alluded to the enrollment numbers, which we were very pleased with. For the year, we had 27,515 enrollments. It was just 300 enrollments shy of our all-time best. So I wish we could have crossed that milestone, but still a very strong number. That averages out to be about 2,300 enrollments per month that are coming in. What's not on this slide is that we also had almost 35,000 contribution rate increases. And that's, I think, reflected in the average deferral rate that Mike alluded to earlier. So that was also up year over year. Mike mentioned the plan design enhancements. We had over 60 employers taking action with those plan design changes in 2025. That impacts over 42,000 participants in these plans. So that was a pretty substantial number with 96 total plan enhancements. And Mike talked a little bit about the interest that we are seeing in employers merging their outside plans into the state 401k or 457 plan. We think that's driven by a couple of different factors, not the least of which is the strength of the plans and the leadership behind that, but also the simplification of their retirement benefits in general. You know, employers are looking to do more with less, just like everybody else is. This is one way they can streamline their retirement offerings. So we're seeing some more interest in these plan mergers. They also find that they can capture some cost savings oftentimes when they're looking at the plan mergers, or they've got service or administrative related issues with an outside plan or what have you. But to that end, both Morehead City and Fayetteville have already merged assets into the plan in the past 18 months. Wilmington is in progress as we speak, as is Morrisville and Cape Fear Public Utility Authority. Those are going into the North Carolina 457 plan. We have the Climax Volunteer Fire Department, which merged with Pleasant Garden VFD, and their 401k, their old private sector 401k plan is merging within the next couple of weeks as well into our 401. And these transactions alone represent well over 1,000 new accounts and about $85 million in assets to the plan. So there's more interest on the horizon. We're seeing it from a variety of outside providers, and our teams are actively working to uncover this and have discussions with employers about, what they'd like to achieve here. So hopefully more good news to share where this is concerned as we move forward. Do you have anything else you want to add about that? Okay, any questions about what we've shared this morning? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Next topic, BNY. We'll have a custodian update from Matt.
All right, good morning, everyone. On behalf of BNY, I really appreciate having us here to present, or having me here to present today. Jeff, congratulations on the 20 billion. That's really an amazing achievement. So I'm Matt Coburn. I'm responsible for the business relationship between SRP and BNY. I've been with the bank for almost 18 years. I've been in the industry for over 25. And over that time, I've seen a lot of very trendy, buzzy things, if you will, in the industry. So when I thought about, the update that I want to provide today, I thought, what's more trendy and what's more buzzy at BNY right now than AI? So really the update I'm going to give today is about how, BNY's thoughts on AI, how we're using AI as it relates to the SRP. I'm really going to cover that in 3 parts. So again, first, what does BNY think of AI? Number 2, how we're using AI today on the SRP and our servicing. And then lastly, what we think that the SRP should think, in its own potential use of AI in the future, and where you are with your peers and what your peers are doing and whatnot. So for anyone who closely follows Fundfire, Ignites, any of the market publications, you know that BNY is all in on AI. Our CEO, Robin Vince, has not only been a proponent of AI. We've full on adopted it. We've implemented it in our day-to-day uses. His tagline is AI for everyone, everywhere, and everything. We collectively, I think, and I bought into this myself, being somebody who's not, so technology savvy, is that AI is really going to be the new internet, if you will. It's going to be something that everybody builds into their normal daily business processes, much like they do the internet or Microsoft Excel. So we've tried to do that at BNY. We've had a significant technology budget that has allowed us to invest in AI and actually implement that AI in all corners of the bank, from the mailroom to accounting to relationship management. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. Robin Vince feels so strongly about AI that he wants all employees to begin using it and to become not just familiar with it, but proficient in it. So he has started tracking the use of AI amongst employees. So any employee at the bank who wants to use our in-house AI system, which I'm going to talk about in just a moment, needs to go through in-depth training, get certified, and then begin using it in their daily processes. Any employees that don't use it will get a call from their manager saying, hey, we are tracking this. You're not using AI in your day-to-day. So taking a step back, it's a little bit of history. So BNY was founded by Alexander Hamilton in 1784, I believe it is. So that's 242 years ago. So Alexander Hamilton's wife's name was Elizabeth. Her friends affectionately referred to her as Eliza. So what better name for our in-house AI tool than Eliza? So take that, Alexa, right? So our in-house Eliza tool is being utilized, again, by all employees. We've tried to use another, trendy word, democratize AI, if you will, by making it, available to employees who don't necessarily have so much of a technology role within their role, making sure that AI somehow fits into what they do. So again, as I talked about, folks in the mailroom using AI to help sort the mail, folks in accounting to help, reconcile and check the NAVs that we strike on a daily basis. And myself in relationship management, I actually used AI to create the basis of this presentation of, okay, what are the points that I should hit on? So again, we're actively using it on a day-to-day basis. Rob and Vince feel so strongly in it that, AI is being used at our hiring process. So when you look at our 2026 hiring class and our most recent class of analysts, they are tasked on day one with utilizing AI. So they go through an AI training class when they start with the bank, and they're trained on their jobs with AI at the center of it. So what are we using Eliza for specifically? Really, it's largely deep research. So Eliza is a form of ChatGPT, if you will. We're using it for deep research, large document summarization. Kind of brings me to a common point. Usually at this point, when I kind of give the spiel to people, they say, well, is AI going to take over our contacts at BNY? Are we going to lose our day-to-day contacts? And the answer to that, I think, is both yes and no. Yes, in that we've already created and employed over 150 digital employees. So these are actual AI agents that have names, that have employee ID numbers, that on a day-to-day show up for work, if you will, and do work within the bank. BNY humans will track the effectiveness of these AI employees to make sure that they're, doing their job appropriately. AI agents who are not performing are terminated. AI agents that are performing are, used in additional tasks as well. So again, we are using virtual employees today. I would say the flip side to that is no, it's not going to replace, your BNY contacts or human employees, because Rob and Vince believes that, AI is here to supplement the employees at BNY to help us with the work that we do, and not to replace your contacts, meaning that we know that clients, as much higher the people service as they do the brand service, if you will. So it's always going to be important to have a Matt Coburn or to a CJ Abadi, to sit across from people, the contacts that they know. Also, you need those human beings to check that AI work. And that's going to be something I touch on when I say, what should SRP be thinking about? Is AI is a great tool, but it doesn't, you always have to watch what AI is producing. Okay. You can't just solely rely on, hey, I'm going to plug in this formula and it's going to give me the answer. You have to check that answer. And frankly, you need human employees that are experienced in this to do that kind of work. So how are we using the AI? How are we using AI on the SRP today? Again, I mentioned this is already in place. AI is helping to more effectively process transactions, including the settlement of securities trades, the allocation of cash to accounts. And I think that the more timelier allocation of cash is a really important point, because if cash is allocated to accounts quicker, it can then be put to work quicker and produce additional return on that cash. We're using predictive analytics to monitor transactions, to identify trends and characteristics within those securities and cash transactions to prevent failures in the market. So again, more straight through processing of trades. From a reconciliation and NAV standpoint, I think it's very relevant to the SRP, is we're using AI in the files that we get from depositories, from sub-custodians, from investment managers, to reconcile those files quicker, to make sure that the NAVs that we're producing are accurate and get done timelier. So again, when we're communicating with the power, we can exchange accurate files quicker. I'm going to speak numbers for a second here. And sometimes these numbers, just jump off the charts because they're a bit large. But so BNY processes about 24 million transactions a week that require reconciliation. About 90% of those 24 million transactions without AI just go straight through processing, no issues. So it's about 22.1 million transactions that are STP. So with about 2.4 million transactions that aren't STP that get kicked out for whatever reason, we're focusing on those 2.4 million transactions and saying, how can we use the predictive analytics? How can we use the AI to get these 2.4 million into that STP model? Where we've already accomplished solutioning about 30% of that, right? So about, just under 1 million transactions, we've been successful in using AI to identify, what typically goes wrong. So our STP improvement rate's gone from 90 to 93%. 3%, increase might not be why are you ringing the bell on 3%? But BNY touches 20% of the world's assets on a daily basis. So when you quantify that, it's pretty substantial. So I think in summary, again, how we're using AI with the SRP is really reconciliation, really, producing NAVs quicker, really getting, cash into your accounts quicker for further reinvestment. I think the long-term benefit will be happier investment managers, happier record keepers, happier clients because everything seems to be going, more and more smoothly. I think long-term benefits are TBD. So, one of the things that BNY is looking to do is take ELIZA and flip it the other way. If you go to say, okay, client, you can access ELIZA. So we're essentially trying to commercialize, the in-house AI, database that we have. What we're working on there is trying to create guardrails around ELIZA to make sure that if we do make ELIZA available to clients, that when they plug in their information, that it stays, within their house, if you will. That other clients that are using AI don't say, oh, SRP is seeing this return on their, their global equity asset class or whatever. So building those guardrails around and making sure that AI is, useful just to that client is really what we're focusing on. I would say we're getting close. We're probably maybe a year away from being able to offer something up to clients. So just FYI there. So that brings me to, what do we think that the SRP should be thinking about as it relates to AI? And I would start by saying nearly all, if not all, of your peers are not doing anything with AI right now. Okay, this is relatively new, and it's something that nobody necessarily wants to be the first to step off the sidelines to go ahead and do something. We have a lot of clients that are kicking tires, saying, "Hey, we're thinking about adopting AI in our own internal business processes. We're going to start with Copilot." The biggest challenge we have right now, though, is if they're a state public fund, the state guidelines right now don't allow for the use of AI. We don't have proper governance in place around how we can utilize AI. So the number one thing that we're saying to clients is, and this goes back to what I said at the beginning of, employees have to take training and certifications and whatnot, is build a governance structure around whatever AI you use internally. So whether that's, analysts, on their phone using ChatGPT to try to figure something out, whether it's you adopting some form of AI, be it Copilot or whatever, is have governance in place that'll, dictates how your employees can utilize it, what information they can pump into it, right? Because it's much like the internet. What you pump into it is going to potentially be visible to others as well. So make sure you have strong guidelines around how you can use it, how it's being governed. I think, and I guess I'll conclude on this. I think the number one lesson that we've learned at BNY, aside from that governance structure, is monitor the results that are coming out of AI. So, I mentioned Alexander Hamilton, right? So I'm going to fast forward to that. I think to President Reagan, trust but verify, right? So trust the data that you're getting out of, your AI tools. It's very powerful. It's very, very good. But, AI is not perfect. We still have a ways to go. We're in the infancy, if you will, of AI. So trust what you get out of it, but verify, and definitely do second looks at it. So I think I'll pause there just for the sake of time. I'm happy to answer any questions or any comments.
Great food for thought. Thank you.
Okay, all right.
This is Lorraine. Can you hear me?
Hi, Lorraine.
Hi, how are you?
I'm well.
Good. So just backing up for a second to the presentation, and this was answered indirectly. I'm sure we're just kind of trying to tease it out. What, if you had to ballpark what you think on a percentage basis, and I said think because I doubt the numbers have exactly been run, what percentage of all this with AI had already been happening? For instance, and I'll give you an example of what I'm asking. You know, if you look at Walt Disney, like Disney World, you could say, well, they use a ton of AI. Well, they've always been a leader in AI. You think about when you go to Disney World, the place is all AI. So it seems to also become, you mentioned at the beginning, a buzzword, which it is. So how much of all this is what was already happening versus what's been put over it?
Yeah, so I'm going to speculate here. I'm certainly not an expert, but I would say this. I would say all of the major corporations in America and across the world have been, using some form of AI, even if it's prehistoric forms of AI for quite some time now. I think that people are realizing that, again, AI, and use the same term again, the same phrase, AI is the new internet. It's going to be embedded in everything that we do. So you either get on board or you get left aside. So I think that, I guess, Lorraine, I think to answer your question is the number of users, it's going to increase very, very rapidly, right? So you're going to see that graph just all of a sudden spike up. And I don't have exact numbers for you in terms of percentage, but I'll say this, the percentage of the overall operations that BNY is using AI in right now has gone from probably about 2% to 40% within about a year period of time. So it's, if you think of that over a 2-year period of time, even 3-year period of time, there's going to be a lot of, there's going to be AI embedded in essentially everything we do. And I think that there's a lot of other companies on that same journey. I don't know if they're on the same trajectory because BNY is a leader, even amongst our own peers in AI. But I think that, I was watching TV the other day and I saw a commercial for, it's like a toaster oven with embedded AI in it. I mean, everybody's trying to get into the game, right? It's going to be embedded, within everything. But I do think the trajectory is very, very quick. So when I think about, the SRP and how you would utilize AI, it is, are you going to, use a form of co-pilot to help with the, with financial reporting or putting, I can see even picture, Patty putting together this presentation here, using AI to combine all the decks and, using the same color schemes and logos and stuff like that. Like, I think it's going to be embedded in a form of what everybody does.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, let's move on to investment updates. So we'll have our partners at Callan join us for a discussion around investment performance and then big topic today, the glide path analysis.
We know this is the moment you've been waiting for. All right, so I will get us started. Given that we have a very important strategic project to think about later on, we will keep performance comments fairly brief. Certainly happy to go into any detail as we go through, but maybe I'll just take us 2 pages forward, Patty, and talk a little bit about what happened in the capital markets, not so much just for the quarter, but what happened during the year. As you look toward the bottom of the page and the bar charts there, you'll note that U.S. equity returns over the last year were very strong. Virtually every category north of 10%. And this is the 3rd calendar year in a row that we've seen these types of returns. Some of the themes that we've talked about in the past, so concentration, that did begin to abate a little bit. So we did see some earnings growth outside of those Mag 7 stocks and some contributions to returns coming from the broader market and not just those few stocks. One very important key point, and this will come up here as we talk about your small cap small and mid-cap option performance, but you'll know the lower quality stocks and unprofitable companies within that Russell 2000 and Russell 2500, those drove performance certainly within the index over all of 2025. And just for information, we have looked at different indices. So that as you think about the Russell 2000, that is, call it the broader market. S&P has a series of the S&P 600, and what they do is they screen out the non-earners, and they say, only earners go in this index. So if you look at the performance of those two indices over time, you rewind it to the inception of the S&P 600, that S&P 600 has outperformed the Russell 2000 by about 60 basis points per annum over the last 30 plus years. There have been two other periods, 1999, 2003, where we've seen this magnitude of underperformance from the S&P 600. So it's another indication that profitability really went on sale here in 2025, and that certainly affected your active managers. Moving to the next page, and we'll talk a little bit about international equity performance. While U.S. equity returns were strong in 2025, the non-U.S. results were even stronger. Again, focusing on the bottom right-hand side on the bar charts there on the right-hand side of the page, all categories shown here are above 20% for the year. So you think about what drove these returns. Certainly, there were some strong operating results and some thematic flows going into non-U.S., but a lot of that had to do with the dollar's weakness over the year. So gains from the dollar weakening relative to a basket of other currencies, that drove about 11.5% of the performance of the index. So you take that out, if we had kind of an equal dollar over the year, returns would be less significant here. And then on page 3, or the next page, we'll talk a little bit about fixed income. 3 key themes over the year. Yield curve shifted down really in front end of the curve, in the belly of the curve over 2025. That helped drive returns here for core fixed income. Credit spreads remain very tight relative to history. And then you think of, I think another key theme that really took place in the fourth quarter was you have the hyperscalers, while they have been asset light for a long period of time, that really, they began to issue new debt to really fund CapEx for a lot of these AI projects and the infrastructure build out. So there was, I want to say, at least $90 billion alone in that fourth quarter that very quickly ramped up a lot of new issuance for debt. So as you think of what was, these fortress-like balance sheets for the Mag 7 and the hyperscalers, certainly not afraid to take on a lot more debt here more recently. All right, so jumping into the asset levels here on the investment fund balances on the next page. Just a couple of things to note here. Also, I was going to mention the $20 billion mark. As of January, we do show a $20 billion balance here for participants. Just Elizabeth and I would look back at our first performance report with you all back in 2019. The fund balance was $11.8 billion. So almost doubling, not quite, but almost doubling the asset levels in a span of 7 years. So
that in 2014 was about $7 billion.
Nice. Yeah, so that has come not just from investment gains, and you mentioned it, Mr. Treasurer, earlier on, but it's come from drumming up participation and really building a great plan, something that participants can believe in and invest in, and really a lower cost option here for participants. So you all have done a great job. And then is Mike mentioned earlier, just a little over half the assets are in goal maker here as we think about the distribution of assets. And so we're going to talk a little bit about how that's allocated a little bit later on. One thing I would flag while we're on this page is while we have the glide path strategic project today, the next on the list, and this will come up a little bit later, is looking at the investment structure of the plan. So that is on two levels. Number one, the number and types of funds that you offer. I think the easy example is, do we offer a real assets fund, diversified real assets fund? Do we not offer that to participants? So think of the number and types of funds that you offer, but also two, you all are offer multi-manager options to your participants. So the more finer detail is that we're going to look at the underlying structures. So certain managers, do they have an outsized contribution to active risk within that option? How do the returns, the excess returns, correlate with one another? What are some of the portfolio characteristic biases that they have that they bring forward? And are there certain risks that are maybe unintended as we think about the options? So that is the next strategic project that we'll be taking a look at here after the glide path is complete. And that will really affect, I think, if you're the inflation responsive fund, and then the tier 2 active, everything below stable value that we'll be looking at there. All right. So moving on to performance. On the next page, we'll just mention at the very top, the tier 2 passive funds are doing exactly what you hired them to do, which is track their indices at a low fee. And nothing so much to call out as it relates to tracking error. Moving on to, maybe we'll say the good here, stable value and fixed income. Very good relative results here, especially as you look at stable value relative to peers. What we're doing here is, because it's a net of fee peer group, we're measuring versus this collective trust peer group. That is a little, just for information, that's a little bit of an apples to oranges comparison. As you look at the separate account peer group, which we typically do gross of fees, the rankings are still very good, certainly above median, but certainly not in that top decile. And then on the fixed income fund, this is one where you have a little bit more simpler structure, but also one where the consistency of outperformance is a little bit more, it's easier to come by. So a little bit more stable alpha and fixed income, and certainly shows in the relative results relative to the index. Moving on to the tougher conversation here is your active options here. Large cap core, some decent peer ranking over the last 3 years. However, the key objective here is to outperform the index. We would have suggested in periods where the index is returning 22% a year, it is likely to be difficult to outperform your index. In periods where the index is a little bit more sideways, 10% or below, we would expect this option to fare a little bit better. The absolute returns are eye-poppingly good, but relative results leave a little bit on the table. On the international equity fund side, again, decent 3-year rankings ahead of its index over the 3-year time frame net of fees, but still some challenges here over the near term. This is one, as I mentioned, the structure. This is one where a lot of the active risk comes from one manager, Bailey Gifford. And so that's something we'll be taking a look at as we think about the structure. Then we told you all in past quarters here on the small and mid cap fund, you all have made a number of changes over the years that we said, just be patient, things will look better. We still think that narrative remains. I would say maybe going back to pre-2025, the narrative here for small cap more broadly, this Russell 2500 index that you all are measured against. A lot of folks were coming forward and saying, hey, this is a risky index. 40+% of the companies in the index have no earnings. And so, it looked as though it was a very risky proposition, index versus kind of active management. In 2025, that narrative really post-Liberation Day turned on its head, and that it was all of the non-earners that really took off. So if you didn't even have revenue, that was a good thing. Anything below $5 traded up. Highest short interest stocks traded up. A lot of companies that continue to surprise to the upside on earnings are actually in a lot of cases took haircuts over the last year. So again, as I mentioned, that S&P 600 versus Russell 2000 comparison. These have happened in the past. These periods where kind of call it the non-earners have this jailbreak. Typically that reverses pretty quick. So if we had to point out a bias that you all have in your portfolio here in small and mid cap, is that you're biased towards higher earnings growth companies. The portfolio characteristics of the option is a lower PE ratio, lower debt as a percentage of equity. And so that, as we think about the structure, is that a bias that you all still want to maintain? And it's, to that degree, or do you want to have some offsetting strategies in there? We still think this is poised to do well here going forward. And you do see that a little bit over the last year in the peer rankings, but certainly well behind the index, again, which is your primary benchmark. All right, so that's all I was going to mention on performance. One last thing before we jump forward. This is on our page 12, Patty, but if this is the manager review, so one more page. Yeah, there you go. This is our manager researches watch list, if you will, and we'll point to some of the things that changed over the quarter, and just a couple of things to point out. Number one, manager that you have on your formal watch list is Sands Capital. Here, one of your large cap managers. They've driven not all of, but some of that underperformance of that large cap option. The thing that we point out here is just a portfolio manager change. Frank Sands Jr. is rolling off as one of the 3 PMs. He is to be replaced by Ben Betcher. Ben, we've known for some time. He's been a part of our meetings over the past couple of years. It's no surprise to us that he's coming in as one of the 3 named PMs. One of the things that we are paying attention to is Frank Sands. He'll remain as the co-CIO, still very involved with strategic things across the firm and really managing a lot of the teams. The portfolio, from our perspective, has really been managed by Wes Johnson and Tom Trentman here for some time. So in terms of his contribution to the portfolio, we don't think that's necessarily material, but the bigger issues are they focusing a lot of their time and energies on some of the private market strategies that they have? And so that's where Frank is going to focus more of his time going forward. So that's one key thing that we're watching. And then also some of the portfolio dynamics that really played out over 2025 that we're paying attention to. They had a great start to the year. They had a lot of good momentum. They gave all that back here in the third and fourth quarter. All right, and then next, on the next page, we'll just mention another change is AllianceBernstein AB small mid value. This is one of your newer managers. We changed our kind of overall product to cautionary, just given some of the performance challenges as well as some of the changes here at the overall level, really at the organizational level. Some of the changes that we're just a little bit more wanted to point out as notable here. But again, we don't recommend any change within the managers at this time. And then Chris will talk a little bit later about one manager that we're going to put on watch, which is Brown at the top of this page. But anyhow, any questions on performance? Anything before we jump forward to the glide path review? All right. Yes.
No. All right, nothing online? All right, let's go.
Great. Before we kick off, I do want to mention we're joined by our colleague Jason Element on the phone, kind of up in the sky for those of us here in the room. So Jason's a member of our capital markets research team. He's an accredited actuary and has really been instrumental in the analysis that we're going to be discussing here today as well.
Good morning, everyone.
Thanks, Jason. So we're going to look forward and really building on Mr. Treasurer, your comments opening the meeting of looking forward. So we recognize that Goalmaker itself, the three underlying glide paths in particular, have served participants well. That has been an instrumental part in getting this plan up to the $20 billion mark. We don't want to just sit back and say, okay, everything's great. We want to say, hey, is there something we can do to help improve outcomes as we look forward, getting from 20 to 40, 40 to 80? Are there opportunities to improve? So we began that analysis roughly a year ago, looking at suitability of the underlying glide paths. And recall, we came to the board last August to share a summary of all the work that we had done collectively with staff, looking at the underlying structures, the glide paths themselves, and said, you know what, we think there is an opportunity to do better and to consolidate to a single glide path. So the board said, go forward. So today we're going to share what we've been working on for the last 5 months or so. We'll start with an overview of the process and then really jump into the key recommendations that we have for the board that are on page 2. So the key things we're going to talk about today are, again, that consolidation into a single glide path that will become the default for participants. We're proposing to increase equity relative to the moderate glide path. That's the current default. So we use that as our reference point. So modest increases to the overall allocation to growth assets. We're also looking to address some of the structural biases. So looking to minimize the overweight that's currently present to small and mid-cap U.S. equities, the overweight to international equities. We also want to improve upon the inflation component that we're offering for participants within the paths. And then last but not least, looking to further optimize the allocations between active and passive management. Okay. So I'll give a quick overview, maybe on page 3, of the process that we undertook to get to these recommendations. So we summarize here the analysis that we did. So starting with the current glide paths and then modeling alternate candidates. So our capital markets team, again, led by Jason, and the actuaries we have on staff used our proprietary model. So looking at current participant demographics, average salaries, salary growth, variety of metrics, everything that we know about participants and risk tolerance. So taking that, modeling that forward to generate alternate glide paths. We have the current and then looking at other candidates. That allowed us to then work with the North Carolina team to evaluate those on a number of metrics. So looking beyond just the return, the accumulation, but also to say, hey, what is the impact on different types of risks? What about drawdowns? What about income replacement? What about shortfall risk? So looking in depth at each of those different metrics to arrive at what is our recommendation today. We include for reference on pages 4 and 5 the capital market assumptions. This is a big driver of the actual numbers that you're going to see today. Page 5 gives a little bit more information about the role of each asset classes. And I just in the interest of that's a gross oversimplification of all of the modeling, the number of conversations that we had, splitting hairs back and forth. Just trust us, it was a very robust process. We're happy to answer questions, but in the interest of time, I think we'll move ahead to the heart of the recommendation. So Patty, if you don't mind, page 6. All right, so starting here, again, this is kind of the key output of that iterative process in all of our conversations, arriving at the recommendation to move to a single glide path. So the 3 glide path structure that is currently in place is unique. We've mentioned that, CEM has mentioned that. And as we think about this being the default, the place that participants go that say, hey, I want you to do it for me, this is going to be a much more simpler decision-making process to have that one glide path. It allows us to really hone in and optimize that. As fiduciaries to the plan and responsible for the glide path, this also helps the board on a go-forward basis to really hone in on, again, that single glide path, to be really thorough in optimizing, monitoring, evaluating, and then operationally implementing the single glide path versus the three. So a number of benefits there that we've discussed to having that streamlined approach here. And on page 7, this kind of gets to the heart of what these recommendations are. So we've got a number of different pieces here. So we show the 3 current glide paths. Green is conservative, orange is moderate, blue is aggressive. The gray dots going down, that's the consensus glide path. So all the major off the shelf, the average of the off the shelf. So think of that as a peer group average. And what we see here is the growth asset exposure. So how much of the glide path is allocated to equities in that growth seeking bucket. Again, because the moderate is the default, that is sort of our reference point, what we're modeling off of. Think back to the original analysis, we knew that the conservative glide path was not giving enough growth, especially for participants who weren't necessarily saving enough. So no surprise, glide path looks very different from that. So in fact, what we're proposing is an increase in the allocation to growth assets. So especially in the first few years, you'll see an increase up to about age 35, starts to come back down at 40. So the growth allocation moves up to the current aggressive glide path line at about 92%, and then begins coming down over time as they get closer to retirement. So again, it's a spoiler alert of sorts. We're not proposing anything dramatic, right? What we have works well. We're really just looking to optimize. So the increases that we're talking about are fairly modest. And when we get to the underlying components, you'll see the bigger changes are the underlying composition structure within U.S. equity and that weight between U.S. and non-U.S. equity. But again, improving outcomes, improving income replacement ratios through this increase in growth assets across the glide path. Questions so far? All right. We'll jump ahead to page 10. Page 9 shows the details of the current page, or sorry, page 8 shows the current, 9 shows the proposed details. But let's go to page 10 because this really highlights the changes. It gets to what's different between where we are and what we're proposing. So it's kind of an eye chart. There's a lot of data on here. Each column represents a vintage year. So we've got the funds for younger participants, the 2070 fund. We also put the participant age to save everybody the quick math. So for our 20-year-olds that would invest in the 2070 fund, all the way over to the right to those that are in retirement, the 85-year-olds in the 2005 fund. Each row represents one of the underlying options that would be used to implement the glide path. And to facilitate this review, we've highlighted the bigger changes. So anything highlighted in green shows that we're increasing by more than 1%. Anything red, we're decreasing by more than 1% there. So what you'll see is the biggest changes are in the growth area. So again, we're increasing growth assets, specifically large cap. So we've talked about this in the last few meetings, that overweight to small and mid cap. So reducing that, you'll see the small mid come down, you'll see the growth or large cap come up. We also have that overweight to international. So a few rows down, kind of in that greenish, the bottom of the greenish bucket is the international line. And so decreasing overall international, moving that to US. In the middle, in the blue, that is the more defensive capital preservation oriented fixed income, which is currently implemented with stable value and the core fixed income option. So you'll see here a little bit of an increase in core fixed income because we're reducing the inflation sensitive component, which I'll get to. So a little bit more there, and then a little bit of a reduction in stable value later. We don't bring stable value in until participants are in retirement. So emphasizing a little bit more the broader, more diversified aggregate exposure as opposed to stable value to give a little bit more return there. And then the other big change I mentioned was in that orange, this is the inflation sensitive, inflation responsive area of the portfolio. So rationale for the change here, early in our careers, equity is the best inflation hedge. Well, overall, equity is the best inflation hedge. When we're early in the career, we have plenty of time. A 20-year-old has plenty of time to recover from volatility in equities. As we get closer to retirement, we're a little bit more sensitive to that volatility. So decreasing the exposure early years, putting more of that in equities when participants have time, and then bringing it back as we get closer. So around age 55, bringing back the exposure. You'll see here too, all of the exposure is going into TIPS. So the inflation responsive fund has not been serving participants quite as well. We don't have as strong expectations going forward. So getting better exposure, better inflation hedging from TIPS as opposed to the inflation responsive fund, which is a mix of TIPS, REITs, and commodities. Questions so far?
Can I just point out that also these recommended changes, it's a fairly significant shift from active to passive, going back to some of the previous conversations. Across most of these nodes, we're moving between 15 and 20% from active into a passive mandate. So that's a pretty significant change as well.
Chris, I was going to wait till later to ask this question, but I think I'll jump in. How are we going to market this to participants? Because it is a significant change.
Yeah, so we'll go through a process to communicate all of this to participants prior to making any of these changes and give them the options to remove themselves from GoalMaker if they're not comfortable with it. But yeah, we're going to go through that whole process as part of the implementation.
But I think further to that point, sometimes having the three choices makes things a little bit more complex. I think this will help to simplify that and bring some clarity to folks who may have otherwise looked at it and said, I don't know which one of these I should choose. Now we're just having the one, which is pretty much standard in the industry, will be something that will be easier for folks to understand.
Thanks.
And as we go through, there are a number of improved expectations and outcomes. So I think we have some really good benefits to highlight to participants. So it's the simplicity, but also expected improvements. And so we can highlight in lower fees as well. So we'll highlight those too.
Elizabeth, this is Steve. Can I ask a question?
Yes, please.
I'm 100% behind simplifying to one model. I think that does make it easier. I find a little interesting, and I would like you to comment a little more about the significant reduction in international compared to the increase in large cap growth, which from looking a lot in the markets today, there seems to be a significant trend toward increasing international exposure now. So I'm just curious why you have the model making that big of a change in international.
It's a great question, one that we did discuss a lot. And Patty, could we move ahead to page 12, please? The rationale here, and Steve, we're not looking to time the markets. We're not looking to make a call. We're really looking to neutralize what's currently a stylistic bet. So right now, in international, oh wait, sorry. Oh, sorry. Yeah, so right now, what we're showing here on the top is the current, on the bottom is the proposed, and it's the blue line that we're looking at, that non-US ratio. So the percentage to non-US versus US within the equity component of the glide path for each year. So currently, the US represents 60, I think it got up to 65% of global markets, meaning US was 35 to 40. We've been at 45 for the earlier, going down to 40. So a little bit of an overweight and a bias towards international. That certainly helped last year. But what we're looking to do is to neutralize that and get that a little bit closer to the broader market. So we're not necessarily trying to call from a valuation perspective or trying to be overweight, underweight, but really just to reduce risk a little bit and bring that closer to market expectations. And our plan is that going forward, we're going to revisit this regularly so that the board is informed of where these allocations lie relative to the broader market, because we know those numbers move around. But you're right, from a valuation perspective, international does look pretty good. And then one other point, Steve, is if I may have said large cap growth, and I didn't mean to, it's large cap core. And you're right, large cap core has also had very strong results in the last few years. So that's definitely something that we're mindful of. But again, the goal is to be closer to the market, to have lower tracking error. So instead of being different, we're going to be more in line.
And maybe just one other comment that I would make. As we built this, we didn't look at what your peers are doing and say, you need to do that. But we certainly wanted to be aware of what other competing target date funds offer. If you looked under the hood of virtually all target date funds offered within the US, almost all of them have a significant home country bias. So we're not, completely neutralizing that bias. You'll still have a very modest bias towards non-US early in the glide path, but you'll be a lot less different from your peers. And while, that has been a headwind here for the past 7 or 8 years, certainly over the last year, you all benefited from that overweight to US. And I'd say the other thing too is when you all last looked at this back in 2015 timeframe, the US, non-US weights, US represented about 55% of the all country world index. That has changed now to what Elizabeth mentioned, to where it's closer to 65% now. So the market has shifted against you all, or the market has changed, and we're reflecting some of that market change. So those would be my 2 comments.
Let's talk about small and mid cap for a second.
Yes.
For those of us who studied this stuff and maybe nerd out a little too much on it, I learned in school, Fama and French factors, excess return came from small and mid cap historically. That hasn't been true in 15, but over 100 years, it's true. We are implicitly making the bet that 15 years is the future and not the 100. Feel good about that.
So I would argue too, again, the market has changed a little bit, and that when you all last looked at this, small and mid cap represented a much larger portion of that Russell 3000 index. So we're not going all the way down to where the index is, but certainly closer to it. I'd say if you look at our capital markets expectations, we still have a small premium for small cap represented in there. And so thus the modest overweight. The thing that I would mention too about the kind of 100-year versus 15-year, if you go back and you look at this is maybe one of the more surprising things is that you look at that when periods when that premium shows up, it's typically when market returns for large cap are 10% or less. So we think of small cap stocks as far more risky, which they are on a year by year standard deviation basis. But in the risks that matter to participants or to a pension plan, which is a lost decade in equity, small cap is actually less sensitive to that. So you think of so the last 15 years, there hasn't been that premium. But what's been happening in large cap market over the last 15 years, it's more than 50% more than that 100-year historical norm of like a 10% return. So to me, that makes perfect intuitive sense that small cap premium has not been, as persistent, or it's been more fickle here over the last several years. But we do think that there is a potential for that, and it is still a small, modest overweight relative to what the market is, but it is not as pronounced.
Okay. Moving forward, we'll come back to the transition process at the end. Page 13, this talks about the real asset and inflation component of the glide path. Mentioned this a little bit before, so the changes here we're proposing just focusing on TIPS exposure. And again, bringing that in as participants are at 55. So up until then, participants have time to weather volatility of equity markets. Once they get closer to retirement, we start bringing in, well, once they get closer to retirement, their sensitivity to inflation starts to increase. So we're reflecting that and also bringing in that risk reduction component too from adding TIPS relative to the equity exposure there. Okay, so modest changes there. Moving forward to page 15. This gives us a little bit more detail to what Chris highlighted before too, of better optimizing the use of active and passive management. So starting here with small and mid cap. Right now, today, the glide path is 100% implemented with the active small mid cap option. So what we're proposing is to bring in passive management starting around age 45. So as participants get closer to retirement, here about 20 years in, looking to lower the risk, lower the tracking error, bring fees down by adding passive management. And you'll see from the red bar is active. So bringing active down. So that means we're increasing passive incrementally all the way through retirement to lower that tracking error and to bring those fees down for participants going into and through retirement. And then similarly on page 16, kind of same time frame, starting around age 45 for international equity for non-US, starting to introduce a passive component, decreasing active at age 45 and incrementally expanding that going forward. Again, both areas of the market have demonstrated an ability over time to add value through active management. Weston talked a little bit about the options. It's been a challenging time. Overall, we do still have conviction, but just recognizing this is an opportunity for us to bring that risk down, lower that tracking error a little bit as we get into the part where participants are more sensitive to drawdowns, more sensitive to volatility. Okay. On page 17, there are a number of asset classes that we did discuss, that we did consider, that didn't advance forward today. So today we're not recommending the inclusion of private markets. And here we're talking about private real estate, private equity, private credit. We talked about this a bit in December as the White House did direct the DOL to come up with some guidance and tips for using private markets within DC plans. So the rationale for this today is higher fees. So we're looking to be aware, we do look at things from a total return net of fee perspective. There are certainly times where there's value to be had by paying a little bit more in fee. These are pretty high. It's a high hurdle. So we're not sure we're there quite yet. We also have some concerns about the operational complexity with private markets. So having sufficient liquidity for participant flows, having daily valuation to be able to strike NAV so that participants can come into and out of options. And then importantly, with the goal maker structure today, anything that's offered in the glide path also has to be offered as a standalone option in the core menu. So if we were to put private equity into the glide path, a participant could also put 100% of their balance into private equity outside of goal maker. And we just don't feel comfortable with the liquidity there, the risks there at this time.
Sorry, is that a policy or a rule?
Structural design.
Structural design.
Structural design. And that's a distinction between the goal maker program and a target date series. So it's just a difference in structure. There are opportunities within the underlying building blocks, so those core options that are offered, there are opportunities to potentially consider private markets within those structures, and that's something we'll continue to look at. So we're not opposed to private markets, and I say today's recommendation very intentionally. We are continuing to look at, we are continuing to evaluate opportunities. We're just finding that with products just now hitting the market that are DC friendly, we feel like it's a little early. We're not seeing an advantage to being the first mover there. So wanting to spend a little bit more time looking at what's coming out, evaluating, and being really thoughtful and strategic.
My 2 cents is I'd like to be last. If all, the guy who spent his career in private markets, I can't figure out why this is a good idea for our participants. But I'm open-minded. I don't know if other board members have different opinions, but let's focus on other matters. Would be my view.
Not hearing any objection, so. We share those concerns. Again, we're going to try to keep an open mind and always evaluating what's out there to see if better opportunities come, but nothing today. Okay. All right, page 18 just highlights we've talked about the different risks that participants face throughout their career path, throughout their lifespans. We've highlighted those there, kind of focusing on that accumulation, making sure that they have enough saved. Importantly, that sensitivity to drawdowns, getting closer to retirement. So, when I was 25, if the markets went sideways, if the markets went down, I had plenty of time. When I get to be 55, I'll have a bigger balance, presumably. And that if we see a big event, whether it's, a quick 2020, whether it's a sustained crisis like 07, 08, that's going to be a bigger hit, could potentially delay. So there's much more impact there that we want to be really sensitive to. And then, of course, longevity, making sure that we don't run out of assets, that we don't outlive our assets. So page 19 is a summary of the current glide path and the proposed glide path and addressing those different risks and how these paths fare. We've included the consensus, that peer group median, and then we also brought in 4 of the big, large, recognizable target date funds just for reference for how these compare. Again, not our primary benchmark, but we know that you all get questions and just wanted to be prepared for that. Not surprising, we've highlighted the risks in terms of red, yellow, green. Importantly, the current and the proposed have no red, a good bit of green, a little bit of yellow. There is no glide path that can perfectly solve for green in every single category, just to put that out there. So we're really trying to be thoughtful about where we're taking risks and how, but you'll see the proposed improves upon that. So we'll start at the top, shortfall risk, expected income replacement ratio, pretty similar. So just up a little bit from moderate to proposed, above the consensus and higher than most of those others. As a reminder, 38% might seem a little bit low, but keep in mind this is the supplemental plan. So for a participant who spends in their career working for the state in any capacity, so for example, teasers employees who maximize that DB benefit get roughly 50% of income replacement from that defined benefit, that pension payment. So we expect this to be a little bit lower.
Offhand, with Social Security on a projected basis.
We did that analysis for the teasers plan. It was about 35% at retirement.
And that includes the reduction in 2032 or whatever that theoretically is coming.
I believe so. Jason, I'm going to look to you. I believe it does.
Sorry, the reduction in 2030, what is that?
When the Social Security Trust Fund runs out of money.
Oh.
We haven't reflected that. We're presuming that it's going to continue to be viable for the indefinite future.
Sorry, I misunderstood what you're
in politics, are you? Yeah, sure.
Sorry, I completely missed that. The downside risk, we mentioned that too. Again, what's the worst case scenario at 60, at 65, at 70? Those are really impactful periods for participants. The proposed improves, well, it's the same at 65, but improves that worst case scenario at 60 and 70. And it reduces the probability of outliving assets, so that longevity risk. So again, just to summarize, across the board, improved outcomes for participants with the proposed. So the method to the madness of these proposed changes is better expected outcomes for participants. Last but not least, fees on page 20 are expected to decrease. So very reasonable at the moment. This is a different methodology than you saw from CEM. What we're showing here is simply the weighted average of the current moderate glide path relative to a peer group that includes passive, active, and hybrid. So we're currently in a hybrid environment, blending active and passive. So today's weighted average fee is 20 basis points, which is lower than that median of 37. and will go down about 3 basis points, largely through the increases in passive, both from going to large cap equity, which is all passive, and bringing in passive in SMID and international. So approved fee as well. And then on page 21, we did consider, there's always that question of why not go all passive? We could get those fees much lower. We could get that tracking error way down if we went all passive. But this really highlights the potential benefit of even just a small incremental excess return. So the modeling that we do generally assumes passive management. So that 38.3% income replacement ratio, that expectation that we talked about. If active management can add even just 20 basis points a year, we can improve that ratio by almost 2%. So think about the excess returns that we've seen in fixed income. We're not proposing any change to passive and fixed income. We're going to look at the structures of all the other asset classes as well. But this is kind of the method to the madness for not at this time recommending 100% in passive. So those are the changes. Next question, which kind of goes back to Mr. Shea's question about the impact on participants and how we're going to communicate this, is the transition. So Patty, I apologize, but could we go back to page 11, please? So this is not going to happen overnight. We're going to have a lot of money moving throughout the course of this transition. This is not a one-day occurrence, which is good news. So timing-wise, Empower, if the board were to approve these changes, they'll need about 60 to 90 days to get things set up within the systems, get participant communications drafted, have those shared well in advance so that participants are fully informed. So we'll need a little bit of time there. And then again, if approved, if implemented, once that starts, each participant paycheck will go into the new glide path. Each participant will be rebalanced based on their own birthday. So this will be a gradual day by day transition. So it's not, Empower will not sit down and on one day say, we're going to move everything into the new glide path. This will be happening incrementally throughout the span of a quarter. So I think that's the biggest takeaway here, is that the question is, what if the markets move on this day, or what about that day? And we're going to be putting a lot into and out of different asset classes. This will be spread out. This will be smooth. Also gives a lot of time to communicate with the active managers, with BlackRock on the passive side, so that everybody's fully prepared and informed going into these transitions with expected flows as well. And then we've highlighted the magnitude of money where everything is flowing into and out of. We kind of simplified it and kept it a little bit more asset class with SMID. So some of that will be active, some of that will be passive, but generally speaking, you can see that magnitude of larger flows into large cap, being funded by small cap, international, stable value, and the inflation responsive fund.
So in that transition period, participant logs into the portal, will they see two different goal makers for that time being? Will they see their existing one and then the new one, and then over time it'll converge to one?
When the updated glide path is put into place, they'll see their new glide path portfolio, and then that'll be effective for all their ongoing contributions. And then until they hit that rebalance date, that'll then change their existing balance structure.
So they'll have the two line items above.
Yeah.
And we'll map all of that out in the communication.
For sure, absolutely.
The goal is for them to know exactly what's coming in an effort to minimize the number of calls. There will still be calls, but we'll try to prepare as much as possible.
Anticipating the most obvious questions. I'm more conservative than average. What should I do? Are we going to give them more conservative options to add to goal maker? What are we going to do around helping people think they should be off this glide path slightly?
Those. Do you want me to take it, or?
I think that's the big takeaway after this is approved, is to think through what that participant communication looks like, to explain the why. And then also in conjunction with that, making sure that Jody's team's equipped for all the one-on-one conversations that we'll have, to just explain the methodology for why we think 3-to-1 is the right decision. And then as much commentary as we want to provide in terms of like all the thought that's gone into this. So speaking from the past time you guys did this, the last time, like in 2017, 2018, when you enhanced your glide path, the communication was also very well thought out there too. And that was, you were maintaining 3, but you were going essentially from a 4x3 grid to a 9x3 grid. But we had the same kind of concerns of like, how do you explain this so you don't see a lot of people opting out? And we were able to successfully do that. So, once this is approved, we'll start working with you guys and with staff like we do on any participant communication to get like a good draft down on paper, and then make sure it's fully approved before it goes out. Typically, that even though this isn't a fund change, I would definitely recommend that it goes out at least 30 days prior to the change date. So participants have plenty of time to either, meet with Jody's team or call our call center to make sure they're making an informed decision.
And the good news too, this might be a little bit of an editorialization, but this is an enhancement. There's nothing broken. There's nothing that's not working. We're just doing a future improvement. So if in the course of developing communications, it seems, hey, we'd benefit from having a few more days to get this in front of participants, we have the luxury of time. So it's not as if this has to be done in 60 days, right? So if we could be a little bit flexible, if throughout the process, it seems that there would be benefit to taking a little bit more time for the transition. That is a nice thing about improving.
I definitely want to play up the lower fees too, with the passive.
This is Lorraine. I have a question.
Go ahead.
So let's say somebody feels like they are more conservative or less conservative than whatever the goal maker would be for their age. Can they opt for goal maker but choose one for a different year? For instance, if I am of an age where I would be normally allocated to the 2030 fund, but I feel like I'm more aggressive, can I choose the 2040 fund, which would address that issue? It would be a way for somebody to fix that sort of.
Yeah, we have participants that do that today, Lorraine. You absolutely, as a participant, can do that. So when you sign up for the Goal Maker service or in the Goal Maker service, you can do that by clarifying and pushing back. You can purposely, if you want to, push back a retirement date to basically get into the glide path that you would want to get into if you don't want to take the standard recommendation based on your age. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, we have not too many, but we do have participants that already do that today. Continue that.
Okay, great.
Is that clear to people on the site that they can, I guess, change that age to?
Absolutely, yeah. We'll put in the default normal retirement age is 65 is the default on that screen of the website. But participants have the ability, if they want to dial that up or down based on their own individual circumstances. Yeah.
That's great, because this isn't, it's not as if this is an unusual situation. T. Rowe Price has a different 2040 fund significantly than, say, Vanguard. So it's not as if what we're looking at is unusual in terms of us being off of some kind of average or off of somebody else's plan. And as an advisor, the way I would fix that for a client, if we had looked at their risk tolerance, knew exactly what we were aiming for, but their goal maker, if you will, their default target fund was off of that, we would look at what the underlying, sort of look under the hood, see what the underlying allocation of the target fund was and choose a different date if that's what we needed to do. So I just wanted to make sure that I was clear on whether employees could do that. So that's great. Thank you. I know not many would. It's a question of whether they could.
It's true. Please. So it's one acknowledged. So Lorraine, as a participant in the plan myself, I've been in the aggressive path on Goal Maker. Enough money is kind of a microaggression. And I've had to sort of think through it as someone in the spot that's probably thinking about this. Are we doing something better for participants? And looking through this and studying it, we really are doing better for more people all the time. And I think it's probably, that's how I got comfortable with saying, we're not really taking something away from people. This was the very thing you mentioned, you can't adjust the age or you can't adjust the retirement date to sort of trick it out yourself a little bit if you wanted to, or you could simply go in and choose a different set of funds if you wanted to do a little bit of homework.
Right.
Or
Okay,
ways
because
to-
for other board members who haven't been on as long, I wasn't on the board when the decision was made to go into the situation where you have the aggressive, moderate, conservative options for Goalmaker. I came in about 1 year later, but it was still a huge topic of conversation. To me, it's a great idea because one person who's retiring in 2030 is not the same from a risk tolerance from somebody else who's retiring in 2030. So I think when this was put in, it was a really good idea. But what's happening is people don't really look at that. And so in practice, what seems like a great idea is not working as well because boots on the ground, it's not what people are doing. That's just a thought.
Said differently, inertia is the most powerful force in this plan.
Right,
Inertia
and for most
is-
people.
Gotta be careful with it. That's what we're doing here.
Mhm.
Just a quick observation. I think the strategic communicators have everything they need in slides 7, 10, and 18. And I'm going to steal this as someone who just retired. I'm going to take this and share this with my wife.
Please do.
Who's not a finance person, would be one of the first people to call you, but this is an outstanding slide. That's slide 18 on the Callan presentation.
That's helpful.
Thank you.
Are you hoping to curb her spending phase?
No comment. It is a public forum.
We'll expect an update on that conversation at the next meeting.
Anything else from board members? Okay, do I have a motion to approve the Goalmaker recommendation then?
So moved.
Thank you, Bob. There's a second?
Steve, I'll second.
Thank you, Steve. Call the roll, please.
Treasurer Briner.
Aye.
Is that Charlie Peruse? Charlie? Lorraine Johnson?
Aye.
Lanier McGree?
Aye.
James Richardson? James Richardson? Raj Singh? And Robert Hillman. Robert Hillman.
All right, we're approved. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks again, Chris, and Kevin have a lot of time in this, so thank you.
Appreciate it. Be a great thing for our members. So let's move over to watch list recommendations.
Chris, TCW first.
For TCW memo, it's going to focus on essentially the watch list removal recommendation. So when we think about removing a manager from the watch list, the question is really simple. Have the issues that triggered heightened oversight been resolved? And so what we look at, the three things we kind of look at is sustained improvement in performance versus benchmarks and peers, stable, disciplined investment philosophy, and organizational stability. In TCW's case, all three of these have been addressed. They were added to the watch list in February of 2024 because of leadership transitions and multi-year underperformance. When we fast forward to today, those concerns have been addressed. Succession plans were executed in an orderly, transparent way. Leadership depth has expanded, and the investment process remains consistent and disciplined. And for performance, it's improved and now aligns with expectations. So while we'll keep an eye on long-term peer rankings, we recommend removing TCW Core Plus fixed income mandate watch list. As a brief reminder, TCW manages 50% of our active fixed income white label fund, which is roughly around 1.3 billion as of December 2025. And this specific Core Plus strategy is relative return oriented, aiming to outperform through security selection and sector rotation. So it is a fundamental approach, value driven process where they keep duration within plus or minus 1 year performance or the benchmark. Historically, non-dollar securities weren't part of the mix this mandate, but recently they've added modest exposure to US dollar denominated emerging market debts. Circling back to the three drivers that, we've been focusing on while they're on watch lists, organizational changes, as I mentioned, TCW has completed a multi-year leadership transition anchored by a structured succession plan, starting with the CIO retirement in 2021, followed by new co-CIOs and a new CEO in 2022, and planned retirements through 2024. All of those were executed as on schedule. And so today, the fixed income team still has deep experience and stability. And so the original investment framework is still intact. Leadership depth, we believe, is stronger than before. Looking at performance, I mentioned earlier, recent results have shown meaningful improvement. So as of December 2025, TCW has outperformed the benchmark across all periods, 1 year and longer. That's a big shift from prior relative performance, which were driven by conservative positioning during a very tough rate environment. But when we look at 2025 results, we're above median relative to peers, thanks to discipline, execution, and consistency. And the last driver really is focusing on peer rankings and portfolio structure. So while the strategy's longer term rankings, 3, the 5, and 7 are below median, this is largely a reflection of its intentional and conservative positioning and structural bias. So TCW typically excels in risk-off environments and understandably, trails during periods of strong credit rallies. And so this performance pattern is fully aligned with their philosophy and risk framework. Because of that, TCW's profile continues to serve as a strong complement to our other fixed income manager, our PGIM fixed income, whose mandate and positioning tend to benefit from different market regimes. So in closing, removing TCW from that watch list is a proactive governance decision on our end. It reflects improved performance, organizationally stability, and a reaffirmed investment process. So this move reduces oversight burden while keeping participant outcomes front and center. I'm happy to take any questions at this time before we move on.
Questions from online? We'll go on that separately.
Yes.
All right, so do I have a motion to remove TCW from the watch list?
So move.
Take it as a second. Okay. Call the roll, please.
Treasurer Briner.
Aye.
Charlie Peruse. Lanier McRee.
Aye.
James Richardson. Raj Singh. Steve Bean.
Aye.
And Robert Hillman.
Aye.
All right. Motion passes. Thank you. Let's move on to Brown Advisory.
All right, so Brown, but the opposite situation. When we talk about putting a manager on the watch list, we're really kind of looking at similar criteria, consistent underperformance versus benchmark and peers, shifts in investment philosophy or significant organizational changes, and significant outflows at both the firm and mandate level. So those signals really tell us whether a strategy may need closer oversight because of potential risk. And in Brown's case, all three are present. So we have seen persistent underperformance, steady asset outflows, and a modest but ongoing personnel change. And because of this, NCIA and Callan recommend adding Brown Advisory SMID-cap growth mandate to the watch list. Now, I do want to stress, we still believe in Brown's investment philosophy and research culture. But taken together, these factors do warrant closer monitoring. So at the same time, we will start a search to see if there is a better option for this mid-cap growth sleeve within the context of the white label fund. Kind of transition to that context. Another quick reminder, I know we touched on it earlier, but Brown Advisory is one of 4 managers within our active mid-cap white label fund. So they manage 30% of the mid-cap equity option, which is roughly $430 million as of December 31st, 2025. The other 3 sleeves, if you will, is the mid-cap core mandate, the mid-cap value mandate, and the mid-cap passive index mandate. And so together, these provide a balanced exposure across styles. And remember that white label fund is also underlying allocation to Goldmaker for a default investment option. Touching on the drivers a little bit more in detail, I wanted to kind of provide a clearer picture what's driving each of these drivers. When it comes to performance, the 1 and 3 year returns have lagged the Russell 2500 growth index and peers, which we've kind of hinted at or covered earlier. But this weakness really does stem from a quality bias mandate. And participating in this type of market, this market's rewarding lower quality, and high beta small caps. But when we look at the long term, Brown has delivered modest outperformance and strong downside protection. Just recent struggles, have really kind of hurt their rankings. Touching on asset outflows, the current trend is concerning. Assets under management has dropped from $7.8 billion in 2021 to $4.1 billion in 2025. And while current levels are still sizable and remain operationally sufficient, that steady decline raises questions about long-term stability. And so continued outflows need additional monitoring. And lastly, the other driver, team dynamic personnel. This isn't as severe as the other 2. It is worth noting, but Brown has planned leadership transitions, which is common in the industry, if you've seen with TCW, and some turnover in specialized research roles. They've offset this with strategic hires, but the pace of change means continuity and sector coverage needs monitoring. Leadership stability and investment in research infrastructure, we believe, still strong, which helps mitigate this risk. But just given the recent performance, the asset trends, ongoing oversight, we believe is still appropriate. And so, similar closing, adding Brown to this watch list, again, is a proactive governance decision on our side. But we're really trying to address performance and business risk, protect participant outcomes, and ensure this specific mid-cap growth mandate stays aligned with kind of our fiduciary standards. Yeah, happy to take any questions this time.
Questions from online? Do I have a motion to add Brown Advisory to the watch list?
So moved. Steve.
Thank you, Steve. Is there a second?
Lanier, seconds.
Thank you, Lanier. Call the roll, please.
All right, Treasurer Briner,
Aye.
Charlie Peruse,
Aye.
Lorraine Johnson,
Aye.
James Richardson, Bob Shay, and Robert Hillman.
Aye.
Motion approved. Okay, that concludes our agenda. Let's move on to comments. Do we have any public comments?
Check to see if anyone's on the phone. Is anyone on the phone signed up for public comments?
We'll consider the public comment period closed. Now time for any board members' comments. Do any board members want to make comments?
Yeah, yes, this is Steve, if I may.
Please.
Reed, I don't know when your departure date is, but congratulations on your transition. If it's year end or whenever, but, or I mean, or closer to the end of the quarter. I'm not sure what your timing is, but just want to thank you for your service all along these years on the SRP board. And also, I just want to comment about the depth of some of the benchmarking and analysis today on a lot of these issues. I think it was very, very good and very useful, and will be helpful going forward.
Well, Steve, thank you for recognizing Reed. I also wanted to do that. Reed has served for plans for almost a decade. And as you heard earlier, some of the comments he made about some of the changes that we've made to the plans over the years, really to make the plans better. And Reed has been instrumental in a lot of that with the document drafting and others. So it's certainly for us here in SRP, we have mixed emotions. About you leaving, certainly. We're sad that you're leaving, but we're happy for you in your next chapter. And again, thank you for everything that you've done for the SRP plans.
Well, I appreciate it, and I've really enjoyed what I've done. It really doesn't feel like I've left because my office has not changed and I've gone anywhere, and I'm literally still doing the same job I did on December 31st. So, but thank you. I appreciate it.
It's still a good time to appreciate you.
Yeah, this is Lorraine. So, same for everything you've done for the plan, and also I always knew you were keeping us out of trouble. I greatly appreciate. Thank you.
You're welcome.
That doesn't mean that we're not going to still come knocking on your door if we need something from time to time.
Well, thank you, everybody. Unless you have anything else, then our final action is to motion to adjourn. Do I have such a motion?
So moved.
Thank you both. Is there a second?
Second, Lanier.
Let's do this by voice. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Thank goodness. All right, we are adjourned.